My sister didn't invite me to her wedding, but the next day her brand new husband walked straight into my boardroom, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Ria Colton. I work as a corporate strategist in Seattle, and I've always been the calm, steady one in my family. My younger sister Marla was the opposite. She loved attention, always wanted to be the star, and somehow our parents let her get away with everything. I learned to step back, to let things slide even when it hurt. But nothing prepared me for the moment I found out I wasn't invited to her wedding. She sent a short message in the family group chat saying the ceremony was only for people who matter. It felt like a punch to the chest. My mother told me not to cause drama, which only made the pain worse. I tried to stay strong, but inside I felt replaced. The next morning, I walked into an important board meeting at work. I opened the door, ready to lead the discussion, when a man at the table looked up and froze. His face went pale. It was Dylan Mercer, my sister's new husband. The man she had married less than 24 hours earlier. He stared at me like I wasn't real. I kept my professional mask on, but my stomach twisted. I knew Dylan from years ago when he briefly worked with us. He had tried to flirt with me once, but I shut it down. I never imagined he'd end up marrying my sister, or that she'd hide it from me. Seeing him there, sitting in my boardroom, made one thing clear: something was wrong, and this story wasn't close to over. Growing up in our house always felt uneven, even if no one said it out loud. Our mom had a soft spot for Marla from the moment she was born. She fussed over her, excused her moods, and treated every small thing she did like it was a miracle. Meanwhile, our dad leaned on me. If something needed to be done, he asked me. If someone needed to act responsibly, it fell to me. I wasn't upset about it as a kid, I just thought that was how families worked. As we got older, the differences became harder to ignore. Marla loved being the center of every room, and she expected everyone to revolve around her. If she didn't get the spotlight, she found a way to take it back. I learned early to step aside instead of arguing. It felt easier to let her have the attention than to deal with the storm that came when she didn't. But the more I tried to keep the peace, the more she pushed. When school became important, she noticed people praised me for my work. That bothered her. She wouldn't say it directly, but I saw it in her eyes, in the way she pulled away, in the sudden coldness when teachers complimented me. I thought she'd grow out of it, but instead the distance grew. When I started building my career, the gap only widened. I acted like everything between us was fine, even when it wasn't. Every achievement I reached seemed to build another wall for her. She stopped asking about my life entirely. She wanted to shine on her own, and somehow she saw me as the reason she couldn't. I kept hoping things would settle, but slowly, quietly, the tension set in like a crack spreading through glass, thin at first, then impossible to ignore. The message came on a quiet evening while I was eating dinner alone. My phone buzzed, and I saw Marla's name pop up. I expected some casual update, maybe a question about our parents. Instead, it was a single line that stopped me cold. She told me she was having a small ceremony and that only important people would attend. No explanation. No warmth. Just a blunt notice that I wasn't included in one of the biggest moments of her life. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure what to feel first: shock, disappointment, or the sharp sting that rose in my chest. I had known our relationship wasn't perfect, but I never imagined she would cut me out of something like this without hesitation. It felt like she had been waiting for a moment to prove just how little space I took up in her world. My mom called a few minutes later, clearly aware of what had happened. She tried to soften the blow, telling me to let it go and not turn it into an issue. She sounded tired, like she just wanted peace in the house, and I understood that. But every word she said made me feel smaller, like my feelings didn't count. It wasn't just disappointment anymore, it was the old familiar ache of being asked to keep quiet so someone else could stay comfortable. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I told her I understood and pretended it didn't matter. But when I hung up, I sat at my table in silence, trying to steady my breathing. The room felt heavier than usual. I wasn't upset about missing a party. It was the message behind it, that my own sister didn't see me as someone worth having there. That she had drawn a line and placed me firmly. A few days after that message, I was at the office trying to keep my mind on work. One of my coworkers, Talia, stopped by my desk to chat. She mentioned she had been at a local event the night before and had passed through the same venue where a wedding had just wrapped up. She joked about the place being crowded and said she'd recognized the groom from a conference we once attended together. She said his name casually, not knowing the storm it would stir in me, Dylan Mercer. My breath caught for a moment. I hadn't heard that name in years. Dylan had spent a short time consulting with our firm, long before he moved into another industry. He was confident, smooth-talking, and always seemed to have a way of getting what he wanted. During the project he worked on with us, he flirted more than he worked, at least with me. I shut it down politely but firmly, keeping everything strictly professional. After that, he kept his distance, and his time with our company ended shortly after. I asked Talia to describe the bride, pretending it was simple curiosity. She mentioned the bride's hair color, the dress, the family standing around her. Every detail pointed to Marla. I felt the blood drain from my face. So that was the man my sister had married. A man who once tried to charm me into something I never wanted, someone I had turned down without a second thought. And she had no idea. Or maybe she did. With Marla, I could never be certain how much was coincidence and how much was driven by rivalry. I kept my reaction quiet, but inside my stomach twisted. The distance between us suddenly felt much more intentional. It wasn't just a wedding I had been pushed out of, it was a truth she clearly didn't want me anywhere near. And now I understood why. The morning after their ceremony, I arrived at work early, trying to settle my nerves before a major meeting. Our firm was finalizing an agreement with a new partner, and I was leading the discussion. I went over my notes, focused on numbers and projections, grateful for something predictable after all the emotional chaos of the past week. I stepped into the boardroom as calmly as I could. The room was already filling with people from both teams, folders opening, laptops waking up. I glanced around the table, ready to greet the visiting representatives, then stopped mid-stride. Sitting near the center, adjusting his tie, was Dylan. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But when he looked up and recognized me, the color drained from his face. His expression shifted from confusion to shock so fast that everyone at the table paused, unsure what they were witnessing. He stared at me like he had walked into the wrong life. I kept my posture steady, refusing to let my reaction show. I pulled out my chair, greeted the room, and began organizing my documents as if nothing unusual had happened. But the weight of his gaze stayed fixed on me. He had no clue. Not one. He realized in that moment exactly who I was. Not the woman who rejected his flirting years ago. Not a distant coworker. But Marla's sister. The sister who wasn't at the wedding he had celebrated only hours earlier. He swallowed hard and looked away, but his hands trembled slightly. I could feel questions circling behind his eyes, questions he clearly never thought he'd have to face. The meeting began, and I led it with practiced confidence, but beneath the calm surface, a sharp truth settled in my chest. Whatever reasons Marla had for keeping me out of her wedding, Dylan had walked straight into the one place she never expected him to see me. And now none of us could pretend the past didn't exist. When the meeting finally wrapped up, everyone filed out in small groups, talking about numbers and next steps. I began gathering my notes, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But the moment the door clicked shut behind the last person, I felt someone step into my path. Dylan. He looked tense, like he'd been holding his breath through the entire meeting. Before I could move around him, he asked if we could talk. His voice was low and shaky, and for a moment I wondered if he was worried about the deal or something far more personal. He guided me into a quiet hallway, checking to make sure no one was nearby. Then he blurted out an explanation I wasn't expecting. He said Marla had given him a picture of me that made him believe I had cut myself off from the family, that I had problems he shouldn't get involved in. According to him, that's why he didn't question why I wasn't at the ceremony. He claimed he never would have gone through with the marriage if he had known things were different. He kept insisting he had been misled, that he wasn't trying to disrespect me. His hands moved restlessly as he talked, almost like he was afraid of what I might say. I listened carefully, but something didn't sit right. His words sounded rehearsed, like he was trying to protect himself more than clear anything up. He wasn't speaking like a man who felt bad for hurting someone. He was speaking like someone who was worried about consequences. I kept my expression neutral and told him I understood his concern, even though I didn't. His eyes darted around the hallway as if he expected someone else to appear and overhear us. He looked troubled, almost cornered. As he walked away, I felt a tightening in my stomach. Whatever was going on between him and Marla, whatever story he had been told, there was something deeper behind his fear. And I had a feeling I was about to find out exactly what that was. As the partnership talks moved forward, I spent the next few days reviewing every document Dylan's firm had provided. It was standard procedure, something I'd done countless times, but I felt a strange pressure tightening in my chest as I went through their numbers. At first glance, everything looked polished, almost too polished. But the closer I looked, the more the gaps began to show. One report listed projected growth that didn't match any of the historical data. Another section showed revenue that couldn't be traced to any real activity. Then I found a set of internal notes buried behind an attachment, notes that mentioned obligations no one had disclosed. The deeper I dug, the more it felt like I was peeling back layers of something rotten. The real alarm hit when I reached the financial statements. Hidden among the routine entries were debts that had been shifted around, almost like someone was trying to disguise them. And then there were the transfers, money moving out of the company without a clear reason or destination. They weren't mistakes. They were deliberate. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, realizing what I was looking at. This wasn't a risky proposal or a careless oversight. It was a setup. Someone was trying to push a deal through using numbers designed to fool everyone involved. And the face tied to those documents, the one sitting across from me in the boardroom, was Dylan. Suddenly, his strange behavior, his nervousness, his attempt to explain himself in the hallway all made a different kind of sense. He needed credibility, something that would make his company look stable. And what better way than marrying into a family known for its solid reputation? My stomach dropped as the pieces fell into place. He hadn't just married Marla quickly. He had married opportunity. And now, without even knowing it, I was standing in the middle of whatever scheme he had planned. I was finishing paperwork late one evening when my phone rang. It was my dad, and the sound of his voice made me sit up straight. He said Marla had come back from her short trip with Dylan earlier than planned. She had shown up at their house shaken, crying so hard she could barely speak. According to him, there had been a fight, loud enough that hotel staff got involved. Dylan had stormed out afterward, and when she checked her accounts later, a large portion of her savings was gone. My dad asked if I had any idea what could be going on, his tone a mix of worry and confusion. He knew things between Marla and me weren't simple, but he also knew that I usually had a way of staying calm when others panicked. I could hear the weight in his words, like he was hoping that I'd tell him there was some harmless explanation. I didn't. I couldn't. I told him I didn't have answers yet, but I would look into it. He sighed, thanked me, and hung up with a heaviness that stayed in the room long after the call ended. I set my phone down and just stared at the blank wall for a moment. Anger bubbled up, anger I didn't want to feel. After everything, being pushed aside, spoken over, ignored, here I was again, expected to clean up the fallout from choices I had no part in. A part of me wanted to walk away, to let Marla deal with the consequences of shutting me out. But the image of her coming home devastated, betrayed in a way she never saw coming, made something in my chest tighten. She wasn't blameless, not by a long shot. But she didn't deserve to be targeted by someone who saw her as nothing more than an easy doorway into something bigger. For the first time I felt a cold, clear line form inside me. I wouldn't let her mistreat me anymore. But I also wasn't going to stand by and let someone like Dylan tear through my family. Not on my watch. Once I understood what Dylan might be doing, I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking like the strategist my job had trained me to be. I went back to every file his firm had provided, tracing each irregular detail until I could map out the truth. The more I examined, the clearer the pattern became. Nothing about the documents matched the story he had tried to sell in our meetings. I broadened the search, speaking quietly with a few employees from his side who had seemed uneasy during earlier sessions. Without pushing too hard, I asked simple questions about workflow and internal approvals. Their answers didn't line up with the paperwork he'd submitted. It felt like pulling loose threads. Every one I tugged unraveled more of what he'd tried to hide. I followed the money next, tracking the unusual transfers I'd seen buried in the financials. With each step, the trail pointed toward personal accounts instead of business expenses. It wasn't incompetence. It was deliberate siphoning. While I was gathering all this, I also looked into what had happened between him and Marla. I didn't reach out to her directly, she wasn't ready for that, but I quietly spoke with my dad. He mentioned something she'd said through her tears, that she had opened a shared account right before the ceremony because Dylan convinced her it would start their life on the right foot. My heart sank when I heard that. Marla had always been impulsive, especially when someone made her feel admired. She had trusted him completely, never imagining he would see her inheritance as an opportunity. He moved fast because he needed access before anyone noticed. Piece by piece, everything fit together, the rushed wedding, the polished presentation, the nervous behavior when he saw me. He didn't expect someone in Marla's family to understand corporate structures well enough to see through his act. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn him. I simply built a solid, undeniable case, every document. Every inconsistency, every transfer lined up and ready. If he thought marrying my sister gave him a free pass, he was about to learn how badly he miscalculated. The following week, I arrived early for another meeting with Dylan's firm, the tension from the previous encounter still fresh in my mind. This time, I made sure every detail was ready. The room filled as usual, executives taking their seats, laptops humming, and I positioned myself at the head of the table, calm and collected. I waited until Dylan strode in, carrying himself with his usual confidence, clearly expecting the same casual session as before. As soon as the meeting began, I opened the files I had prepared. The room fell silent as I laid out the financial statements, highlighting inconsistencies that no one could ignore. I traced each transaction, each false claim, and each hidden liability, showing how they connected to his personal gains. The executives leaned in, murmuring as they realized the scale of the deception. Compliance officers I had quietly contacted were present, confirming every irregularity with clear, documented evidence. Dylan shifted in his seat, his confidence slipping with every slide, every explanation I calmly delivered. He glanced at me, panic flickering across his face, but he found no words that could defend him. He tried to interject, to explain away a number or a transfer, but the documents spoke louder than his excuses. Every loophole he thought he could exploit had been sealed. By the end of the presentation, the executives made swift decisions. Contracts were paused, partnerships dissolved, and Dylan sat frozen, realizing the full extent of how cornered he was. His plan to use family connections as leverage had collapsed in front of everyone. I watched silently as the man who thought he could manipulate everyone learned the hard truth: underestimating me was his gravest mistake. The room shifted back to business, and I remained poised, knowing the reckoning had only just begun. A few days after the boardroom battle, I drove to Marla's apartment. I hadn't seen her in weeks, not since the wedding chaos, and I wasn't sure what to expect. When I knocked, she opened the door, her face pale and eyes red. The confident, sharp-edged sister I remembered had disappeared. Instead, there was someone fragile, a little lost, and trembling under the weight of everything that had happened. She invited me in quietly. The apartment smelled faintly of her favorite candles, but it couldn't mask the tension in the air. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. She seemed unsure where to begin, wringing her hands, her voice catching when she finally did. She admitted that she had lied about me to Dylan, spinning stories about me being distant and unstable to make herself look better. She confessed that she had always felt smaller, less capable, overshadowed by me, and had made choices out of fear and jealousy rather than malice. Her words shook me, though not entirely in the way she might have expected. I could see the cracks in her confidence, the guilt she couldn't shake, and a kind of helplessness she rarely showed. She tried to apologize, voice shaky and uneven, but then froze, admitting she didn't know how to make any of it right. I didn't forgive her, not yet. I had learned that trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight, and wounds this deep required time. But I allowed myself to recognize the vulnerability in front of me, the sister I had loved despite everything. I stayed for a while, listening, not offering advice or judgment, just presence. For the first time in years, it felt like we were both human again, flawed, scared, and searching for a way forward. It was a small step, but one I could accept. And I realized some bridges needed to start with understanding before forgiveness could ever appear. After the meeting, the consequences of Dylan's actions moved faster than I could have anticipated. The company severed all ties, and news of the irregularities began to circulate quietly among regulators and industry insiders. Investigations were opened, auditors combing through every document he had touched. His once confident demeanor vanished, replaced by frantic calls and meetings that went nowhere. Marla, finally seeing the truth for herself, decided to end the marriage. She filed for an annulment, citing misrepresentation and deceit. The process was swift, leaving Dylan scrambling to defend a position that no longer existed. His carefully constructed facade of control crumbled under the weight of proof and accountability. He attempted to reach me multiple times, claiming he needed to explain himself, that he was owed a conversation. I didn't respond. Instead, I enlisted legal counsel to ensure all communications went through proper channels. Every attempt he made to contact me was blocked. I realized some people only respect boundaries when they are enforced legally, not politely. Meanwhile, the fallout at his firm intensified. Colleagues distanced themselves, partners withdrew, and projects stalled indefinitely. What had once seemed like a fast track to wealth and influence became a professional dead end. He had no allies left and no credibility to rebuild. Through it all, I watched without involvement, focusing on keeping my own life and family safe. There was no satisfaction in seeing him panic, only clarity in knowing that justice, measured, silent, and methodical, had taken its course. In the quiet aftermath, I felt a weight lift. The chaos, the deceit, and the fear of what might happen next had finally ended. I chose to walk forward, leaving Dylan's collapse behind me and claiming the calm and control that had always belonged to me. Peace, not revenge, became the final victory. Weeks later, I found myself sitting across from my father in the quiet of our living room. He looked older, wearier than I remembered, and there was a heaviness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. He admitted, finally, that he had let things go too long between Marla and me, favoring her impulsiveness while relying on my steadiness. He said he hadn't realized how much it had hurt either of us, and for the first time I felt truly recognized. That conversation marked a turning point. I started setting limits I hadn't before, not just with my sister, but with myself. I learned to protect my energy, to acknowledge my worth, and to allow my own life to unfold without constantly accommodating others' insecurities. It wasn't easy, old patterns die slowly, but every small step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Marla, for her part, began seeing a therapist, cautiously exploring the reasons behind her choices and the jealousy that had governed so much of our relationship. She started taking responsibility in ways she never had before, reaching out carefully, learning that trust was earned, not assumed. I kept my distance at first, watching, listening, and allowing her to prove that she wanted change. In quiet moments, I reflected on everything that had happened. The exclusion, the betrayal, the threat, and the reckoning had all left marks, but they also revealed something vital about me. I realized that my actions hadn't been about vengeance for its own sake. I had acted to protect my family, to assert my own value, and to reclaim the control that had been denied to me for years. I learned that sometimes the most powerful response isn't punishment or retaliation, it's refusing to diminish yourself for the comfort of others. Strength isn't loud. Strength is steady. And finally, I felt like I could be steady for myself. Hey besties! Thanks so much for watching till the end. This story shows how betrayal can hit us in the places we least expect, even from those closest to us. Feeling invisible, underestimated, or pushed aside can be crushing, but it also sparks a fire inside. Standing up, setting boundaries, and protecting yourself is powerful. If this journey moved you, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more emotional stories. See you next time.